Okay, let's dive in. We've got quite the collection of material here from you, articles, notes, some really interesting threads, all pointing towards, well, something pretty mind-bending about reality itself.
It really is. And thanks for letting us wade into this. What's striking across these sources is this radical idea they're proposing.
Yeah, that space and time, they aren't the stage. They're not fundamental.
Exactly. The core proposal is that they're emergent. They arise from something else, something deeper.
Right. The sources keep pointing to coherence as the ground state, and space-time just kind of unfolds from how that coherence behaves.
That's the gist. And it's fascinating how these papers trying to connect that idea to everything from physics and cosmology to, well, even biology and consciousness. It's quite the unified picture they're painting.
So our mission here, for us, and for you listening, is to unpack the key ideas from your sources. We need to get our heads around this ontological stack of emergence they talk about.
And that really surprising role for the photon.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely get to that. And, crucially, how this whole framework apparently helps untangle some really long-standing scientific knots, some major paradoxes, which should be some aha moments, hopefully.
Definitely prepare for a bit of a conceptual flip. So this ontological stack, it's their proposed structure for reality, starting from the most basic level.
Okay, lay it out for us. What's at the bottom?
They start with information, but not like computer data, more like
Yeah.
the substrate of all potential, the raw possibility of what could be.
The unformed stuff. Got it.
Then comes coherence.
Yeah.
See, this is where that raw potential gets structured. It's information that's aligned, symmetric, patterned, like order emerging from random.
Okay, potential, then structure. What's next?
Energy, E. And they define it very specifically, the rate of meaningful change in that structured information. There's even a formula, E=d/I/dt. So energy isn't a thing itself. It's about information changing coherently.
Okay. Information in motion, basically.
Kind of. And that motion, that change, gives rise to emergent time. Key. This isn't clock time. It's the experience of sequence, of one thing following another, which arises because coherence is, modulating how information flows.
So time itself is a result of this structured change.
According to this framework, yes. The formula they suggest is T=C=E_IE. It binds coherence, information, and energy together to produce what we perceive as time.
And finally, what we actually live in, space.
Well,
Yes.
In space, in this view, is the crystallization of that emergent time. It's what happens when time slows down, stabilizes, and takes on a persistent geometric form. S=S2 TETIT. Like time freezing into geometry.
Right. Okay, so information makes a coherence, makes an energy, makes a time-space.
But critically, they stress it's not just a one-way street, it's a loop. Space provides the context for new information and coherence, which drives energy and time, which forms space, itself creating recursively defined, no absolute start point.
All right, now this next bit feels really central to the whole argument in these papers. Emergence requires contrast.
Yes. I love this part. It's such a simple, elegant idea. Existence requires contrast. You can't have a thing without a not thing to define it against.
Like light and dark, sound and silence.
Exactly. Or the river analogy.
Yeah.
You only perceive the river slow because the banks are still. You need the contrast.
So for time to emerge, to flow, there needs to be some kind of timelessness as a backdrop.
Precisely. And for space to emerge, there needs to be non-space. Not emptiness, but maybe infinite potential without geometric structure. A state of pure coherence.
This pre-temporal, pre-spatial state, it wasn't nothing, it was just undifferentiated potential.
Infinite potential, locked in perfect symmetry, yeah. Waiting for a contrast to break to allow things like time and space to actually emerge.
Okay, this feels like a good point to bring in the photon, because the role it plays in these sources is, well, it's pretty stunning.
It absolutely is. It turns the usual picture on its head. They're arguing the photon isn't just some particle zipping through space,
Yeah.
but that it's the main agent of this temporal coherence. And get this, it's effectively writing space into existence as it propagates that coherence.
Wait, what? So light doesn't travel in space, it makes space as it goes.
That's the core claim. It's the carrier of coherence, and the act of transmitting that coherence, that fundamental structure, is what unfolds the geometry we experience as space. It's like laying down the tracks of reality.
Oh, wow. Okay. That changes things. How does that connect to, say, the Big Bang, what came before? That's always the big question, isn't it?
It is. Standard physics kind of hits a singularity, right? Time breaks down. But these sources propose something before geometry and linear time. This primordial coherence field, PCF.
So this PCF, it's pre-geometric Timeless.
Yeah, a state of infinite information, but in perfect symmetry, like a perfectly still, infinitely complex pattern. No change, no distances, just phase-locked potential.
In the Big Bang.
In this framework, it wasn't an explosion into space. It was the first decoherence event, a shattering of that perfect symmetry in the PCF.
A rupture.
A rupture, exactly. And that break allowed emergent time to start flowing, to unfreeze. And then space started to form as this unfolding coherence began to stabilize, to fossilize, recursively.
So before was the state of pure potential coherence, and the Big Bang was the moment it broke symmetry and started unfolding into time and space.
Yeah.
That's a very different picture.
It is, and it leads directly to another core idea they hammer home. Space is emergent time, specifically the crystallization or fossilization of it.
So when time slows down or gets localized, it becomes space, like a memory trace of past changes.
You got it. It's the spatial memory of information change solidifying. The music to sculpture analogy is good. Stop the music time, and you're left with a form space.
All space is all time, because space is just time folded into geometry. That quote from one of the sources really sticks.
It encapsulates it perfectly. Every point in space is a record of past temporal dynamics.
Which brings us back again to the photon, and this photon paradox the sources use as sort of evidence.
Yes, this is a really clever point they make. Think about a photon from its own reference frame. Zero time passes. Instantaneous travel, whether it's across a lab bench or across the cosmos.
Right, for the photon itself, the journey takes no time at all.
But we observe it taking, say, billions of years to cross billions of light years of space. How can something that experiences no time traverse vast amounts of space that requires vast amounts of our time?
Yeah, that is a paradox when you frame it like that.
Their answer. The paradox dissolves if space doesn't exist until the photon creates it by propagating coherence. The photon isn't moving through space, it's generating the spatial dimension as it travels.
So it's not bound by space-time, it's the agent creating space-time for us observers.
Exactly. It's pure coherence, timeless in itself, projecting space from its temporal nature. A fundamental insight, if it holds up.
And the claim is, this reordering coherence first, then time, then space, helps resolve other big problems.
That's the argument laid out here. They apply it across different fields. Take quantum mechanics, wavefunction collapse, the observer effect.
Yeah, always weird.
They suggest that's emergent time crystallizing into a definite spatial form because of the interaction, the observation. You're not passive, you're participating in making the potential actual spatially.
And entanglement, things linked instantly across space.
If space is emergent, maybe entanglement bypasses space because the connection exists in their shared emergent time, a deeper layer that hasn't yet solidified into spatial separation.
Okay. What about cosmology and gravity? We touched on before the Big Bang being the PCF.
Right. And gravity. Instead of warped space-time fabric, they propose it's about gradients, tensions in the emergent time field.
So mass.
Mass is seen as trapped or highly localized emergent time. It slows down the local flow of time. And since space is crystallized time, altering the time flow inherently curves the resulting space. It's a dynamic process, not bending a static sheet.
Fascinating. And they even connect it to biology and consciousness.
They do. Things like aging are framed as a loss of coherence in emergent time within the organism. Sleep is maybe a process to reset or reinforce that coherence.
Makes a strange kind of sense. And consciousness itself.
Proposed as a self-referential resonance of this coherence. The self as a stable pattern of resonant coherence loops. And memory. Frozen emergent time, again, physical, spatial records of past coherent states in the brain.
It's ambitious, connecting all these dots. What about dimensionality? Why 3 spatial dimensions? Is that fundamental in this view?
No, dimensionality itself is seen as emergent from time. If time froze entirely, dimensions would collapse. No change means no way to define distinct directions or extent.
So 3 dimensions is, what, special somehow?
They propose it's the simplest configuration, the minimum number needed for coherent information patterns to become stable and recursively complex without just collapsing or becoming chaotic. It's the natural geometry for stable emergent time to express itself.
Like it's the sweet spot for complexity to arise from coherence.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
The minimum dimensionality that allows for rich, stable structures based on these underlying temporal dynamics.
Okay, this is a really interesting framework. But is it just a nice story? Or are there ways to actually test it? Do the sources suggest testable implications?
They do, and that's crucial. They point to several areas. For example, looking for tiny variations in the fine structure constant, alpha, across the cosmos, or deep time. If alpha isn't perfectly constant, it could signal changes in the local coherence field, meaning space itself isn't uniform.
So finding alpha changes would support the idea that space isn't fundamental.
It could be interpreted that way, yes. Also, examining CMB anomalies, the patterns in the leftover heat from the Big Bang. Instead of pure randomness, they predict we might find specific harmonic or fractal patterns, fossils of the coherent structures from the very early universe as time first emerged.
Like echoes of the first moments of time crystallizing.
Exactly. And looking at galactic alignments on huge scales, do galaxies cluster randomly? Or do they line up along preferred directions, potentially tracing the paths where ancient coherence fields first wrote space into existence?
And even closer to home, you mentioned biology.
Yeah, they speculate that our own consciousness and time perception might be sensitive to local coherence. Could things like heart rate variability, HRV, or specific EEG patterns correlate with altered states or environments in ways that suggest probing the emergent time field?
That's venturing into tricky territory, but interesting.
And finally, studying gravity wells, places like near black holes where time is strongly dilated. Do these regions show measurable differences in coherence properties, directly linking the space-time curvature we observe to the underlying coherence dynamics they propose?
So there are potential observational handles on this. It's not pure philosophy.
That's the claim that it makes predictions we can, at least in principle, go looking for.
Which brings us back, full circle, to the photon. If this whole structure holds space from time, time from coherence, the photon seems absolutely key.
It's positioned as the fundamental agent, the carrier and propagator of the coherence that ultimately builds reality. Control the photon.
And you're not just manipulating light. You're potentially influencing time, space, even mass, which they see as trapped coherence.
The sources get quite profound here, suggesting that controlling light genesis, the very creation of photons, wouldn't just be controlling reality, it would be generating it.
That's a big thought to end on.
It really underscores the photon's central role in this entire proposed cosmology. It's the composer, not just a note.
Okay, let's try and summarize this deep dive. The core takeaway from your sources. Space and time aren't the fixed background we assume. They're emergent results of something deeper. The interplay of information and coherence and the change that arises from it.
And the photon is the star player, the agent that doesn't just travel through space-time, but actually writes it into existence by propagating coherence. Space emerges from time's crystallization.
It completely flips the usual script, doesn't it? Space arising from time, not the other way around. It's a genuine paradigm shift they're suggesting.
And then that leads to the final, maybe most provocative idea threaded through this material. If light writes space and time emerges from coherence, well then, as one source puts it, the universe must carry scars, fossils, and harmonies of its unfolding.
Meaning, the structure we see isn't arbitrary. It contains the record of its own creation, based on these coherence dynamics.
Exactly. And the implication is, we might actually be able to find those signatures. This isn't just a creation story. The sources frame it as potentially testable cosmogenesis.
So, something for you, the listener, to really chew on. Consider this perspective. Maybe look again at some of those areas mentioned, cosmology, quantum weirdness, even biology, and wonder if the clues to this deeper reality might be hiding in plain sight.
It definitely reframes how you might look at the universe and our place in it. A fascinating set of ideas to explore further.